Go. Got it. Hey, everybody. I'm Eric Paraxos, the Chief Science and Digital Officer at DCRI and a professor of population health sciences at Duke College of Medicine. I'm here today to talk about truth, trust, and biodefense. So what does an 80s movie has to do with biodefense? Well, I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, and I was thinking about, what movie reminded me of the pandemic. And the movie that came to mind this pandemic was Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. And there's a couple of reasons for that, right? I mean, from Wikipedia, the plot tells a story of a troubled man who videotapes women discussing their sexuality and fantasies and his impacts on the relationship of a troubled married couple and the wife's younger sister. So kind of uncomfortable, right? Talking about sex and whatnot. Well, a lot of what's gone on in this pandemic with COVID has to do with what people are comfortable talking about, what they're not comfortable talking about, what they feel vulnerable about, what they're willing to share, what they're not willing to share, and when, why, and how those reasons might be their own. So I think there's some wisdom in this, but I also think there might be a little fun in this. So for folks that aren't familiar with the concept of biodefense, the history of biodefense has really been about pathogen defense. And in particular, it's been really dominated by like the terrorist use of pathogen defense, like biological weapons or something like that. And the time that most of us can remember maybe of that was back after 9/11, when some anthrax laced mail was sent and actually killed 5 people and 17 were sickened. And this really startled the biodefense kind of industry, just like 9/11 startled everybody, especially the airline industry, the travel industry, et cetera. This really startled the biodefense industry. But we have to kind of be careful about that, right? Because there's a couple things to it. One, over responses are always something you have to think about. But when you're talking about defense and strategy, you also have to really think about the nature of an adversary and what they're doing. Maybe they did something to deceive you into looking at that because they want you looking the other way. So, maybe a slightly impolite way to think about that is imagine what the airline security on your annual trip to Disney World would have been like if the shoe bomber had put the bomb in his rectum instead of his shoes. Nobody wants that inspection at an airport, right? But yet we take off everybody's shoes, including the 100-year-old, poor person in a wheelchair has got to take their shoes off. And, we've got to be careful about when we're being told to do things and when we're being told to look a certain way by an adversary. So I want to start with a case for redefining biodefense. You're right. So again, after 9/11, really got about pathogens, how to detect pathogens in the mail, how to detect pathogens in airports and things like that. But if you actually look at the math here for a second, you find out that, in 11 years from 1995 to 2016, there were roughly 3,220 plus American deaths due to terrorism, which of course is a horrible number. The Biohacking Village and DEF CON and myself and my own research were really focused on medical device security. Truth is, as much as we know there's a risk, there aren't that many documented cases yet of where there's actually been a death or serious injury, although we did have one this year where a ransomware attack in Germany was linked to actually directly causing a death. And we know that the rise of cyber attacks and data breaches in hospitals has been linked to things like higher incidence of heart attacks and things like that. Yet at the same time, we also know that 600,000 people died in this pandemic, which is way more than died in all of World War II. So if we're going to think about how we're defining biodefense and maybe how we should redefine biodefense, I think we have to actually put pandemics caused by whatever, nature or somebody else, as one of the main things that we're looking out for. So going back to the movie here, I'm going to talk about trust, truth, and biodefense. And so, looking in this movie, there were just some really great quotes that meant a lot. So in this case, Anne is mad when she finds out her husband's cheating. She says, "Nothing's what I thought it was. John's a bastard. Let's make a videotape." There's some pretty important stuff in this. First of all, someone's mad and they want to talk about it. Yeah, well, welcome to Facebook. And welcome to online chat groups and stuff like that. When somebody thinks that they've been deceived or duped, they're much more likely to talk about it. And they still may be wrong about what really went on. But the idea here is that angry people take to the internet and angry people can convince non-angry people to do things. And so we have to think about, what we mean by trust and when we're violating trust. And this especially includes when medicine's violating trust. I mean, right now we're in this latest wave of COVID and truly looking like a pandemic of the unvaccinated, that this virus is just circulating and hopefully not mutating and evolving in unvaccinated populations. We know from vaccine sentiment and studies like that, that most of these people that aren't vaccinated were influenced by different types of information campaigns and politics and the last election cycle and whatnot like that. There are some people that have always been vaccine hesitant, right? So that has to be out there too. But we know that it's a very different thing now. And we have to understand that information, media, things like that are directly contributing to life and death choices that people are making. And I've been saying this for a while. If you saw my last DEF CON talk, I think if we look at rebuilding trust in medicine, I think that's where we are. We can talk about the disinformation and whatnot, and we could talk about the lady who, went viral saying that, a vaccine made keys stick to her head or something like that. We might even snicker at that. But the fact is, there's got to be a reason why these people don't trust doctors and don't trust scientists and don't trust the government. And, here's just a few facts. But if you think about it, if you look at the last one, if just 1/3 of Americans trusted the government to do the right thing in 2019, what do you think that number is now? So this is from my last DEF CON talk. And in general, the way I've talked about it is that misinformation and disinformation should be viewed as a medical problem with a media dimension. And that the only way to address it long-term is to address why people don't trust doctors and science. And here's a few of the facts. Medical errors, still the 14th leading cause of disease burden across the WHO. We have significant unmet grievances of cost and inequity in medicine today. People are cynical and isolated by what's gone on. There really isn't a great way for patients to express grievances with medicine today, other than taking it online. How many hospitals are really open or hold open public forums and town halls to hear about how patients felt that week? And probably not a smart way to do the cure, but if you think about it, there really aren't forums for it. How to better enable gender, faith, and ideologies-based specificity. People have different beliefs, and we can't discard that. They're meaning them. Aren't all large industries corrupt if people are making money? And then, what about radicalization based on bad luck? I mean, the fact is that, we have seen, for example, breakthrough COVID deaths because of vaccinated people. It's extremely rare, and the math is extremely complex. But you know what? It happens, and then it gets amplified, and then it gets blown out of proportion. So we really have to deal with this medical problem with the media dimension. But can we get our message? I mean, one of the things that shocks me is I continue to see what I think are kind of self-inflicted wounds by science and medicine. It's very easy to say, pandemic response hinges on trust. I'm going to go into that in a lot of detail from this and other pandemics. Of course, that's true. But how do you get to trust if you can't stay on message? This one alone in the last few weeks just startled me. Pfizer putting out an announcement or, basically communicating they thought somebody might need a booster shot. And then immediately the medical establishment, CDC, others, it says people probably don't need a booster shot. I'm just kind of want to pull my hair out and say, really? I mean, really, like Pfizer, you couldn't have talked to the CDC before you put the message out and see if you guys could have gotten on the same page instead of doing something like this that's going to actually allow, disinformation people to just go hog wild. We can't feed them data like this. We can't give them reasons to do this stuff. This, to me, 100% preventable. And actually, if you really read it, neither of these two are saying anything that really contradicts the other, but it can be sure be made to sound like that way in clickbait. Let's talk about privacy in the movie for a second. So we're talking about these interviews of people on their habits. And so all these are interviews, huh? Yes. Can we watch one? No. Why not? Well, I promised each of the subjects that no one would see the videotapes except for me. One woman used up 3 minutes. The other one used up two 2-hour tapes. So this is a lot like conversations I have when I've talked to people about things like contact tracing and when I talk to things about security or privacy and why this enterprise thinks they should have data, but this one can't. In particular, in trying to set up COVID testing earlier this year, there was data that the CDC wanted that was actually being blinded by the counties to the states. So how does that data go through? The answer is it doesn't, And so we've got to get on page on what privacy is. We've got to get on page in something like a pandemic response with a simple case report form about what's going to be public, what's going to be private, and that means to everybody. How about contact tracing? What are those phone calls like? And did he touch you? Did he touch you? No. Did you touch him? No. Did anybody touch anybody? Well, yes. This is what contact tracing conversations can sound like in case you've never sat in on one or heard one or anything like that. It'd be very personal. You're out on a date, you did this, you went to the dentist this day. You know, we have to think about what we should have learned in the 80s from HIV when we had an epidemic, a deadly non-treatable disease, and the social stigma was so bad that people were scared to share their testing status, which was the most dangerous thing they could do. But they're worried about their jobs and they're worried about their lives. And we've got to be thinking clearly about this stuff. And we've got to remember that the lessons are there. You know, this is a great piece on community trust in the Ebola endgame. It talked about what it was like in the West African Ebola outbreak in 2014, 2015, and I was there. And it talks about how, you know, people would come in and talk to people in villages, and people would run out screaming, saying, you know, they're going to take your baby and they're going to cut your baby into little pieces. You know, in 2014 and 15, that sounded absurd. Have you seen some of the US headlines in 2020, 2021? They're no less absurd than that. And, you know, this is myself and a postdoc in a village in Kona, Sierra Leone. And you can tell from the looks we're getting as we're talking to people that, you know, not exactly all that much trust and love going on there, but they did talk to us. And they did point us to what we needed to see. But they did it because we're standing there, nothing in our hands, no soldiers with us in the village, we were more vulnerable than they were, and it built trust. We've got to learn from these lessons. We can't make mistakes. And I think we've got to turn around and say, even if we're seeing what appear to be really severe responses to things, it can't be that we go ahead and start tweeting about how silly people are. It has to be that we start addressing why people feel that way. You know, and so very, very similar, you know, this was all over the place. I was interviewed, I think I was on Political and a few other things about that, but the whole contact tracing thing, most people would just say probably hasn't worked. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. One is the disease moved too fast and moved too populated. Another reason would be people simply didn't trust it. People didn't answer the phone. When an 800 number calls your cell phone, do you answer it if you don't know who it is? People don't. The other thing is that some of these things were really just surveillance. You know, some of these high-tech things that were really just like proximity alerts of, we can see you on a GPS and your little red dot is next to a red dot of somebody that might have tested positive. I mean, it's Brownian motion of humans. You don't know what they were wearing. You don't know if they had masks on. You don't know what happens in Lowe's in a checkout line. And so, I mean, contact tracing is something that's been around for hundreds of years. And the truth has always been, it's been about trust. And this menace to public health article I suggest to everybody. It's a great article on 1800s, 1900s, past 1700s, past epidemics, and how people got people to talk to them. Paying them usually worked, but it's a pretty fascinating piece to see what we're living through again. And the bottom line is simply here: you don't need invasive tech for successful contract tracing. What you need are community-based engagement, and you need trust, and you need to ask questions that respect privacy, and you need to provide assurances that you're going to protect privacy. You know, it's a little bit late now with the level of community spread we have and stuff like that. But, you know, one of the things that people like me think about people where this isn't their first rodeo when it comes to infectious diseases is that I really hope the next one isn't more deadly than this. You know, with a disease like this, as horrible as it is, all the people we've lost, roughly, you know, 1.8% death rate or something like that overall, right? Pretty low. What if it was 20 or 30%? You know, what we've shown is how badly we can handle it. We need to show how well we can handle it. What about truth? Graham, I remember reading somewhere that men learn to love the person they're attracted to, and women become more attracted to the person that they love. And Anne, I've just got all this time on my hands. I sit around and I start inventing these like intricate scenarios, and then I don't want all that wasted time. I want to believe in them. Let's talk about misinformation versus disinformation. You know, because I actually have worked with a family that had a child that had cancer, and the child did very, very well with cancer. But the child recently was taken out of follow-up care because one of the parents became very vaccine hesitant and very suspicious of the medical establishment that had saved their child's life. And now not only did that child get COVID and did okay, great shape, but also now, you know, is not doing follow-up care or adult care for her very serious childhood cancer. And, you know, people do have a lot of time on their hands during lockdowns, and people will read all kinds of stuff and they will invent scenarios and then they will talk about them. This is really human behavior. But that type of misinformation, we have to make sure we're separated from disinformation, which unfortunately is what I feel is going on in parts of the media right now, where they're intentionally giving out false information to try to drive certain behaviors. So this is a great couple of pieces. Something that people ask me about sometimes is, are we living in a post-truth world? And I didn't really know what that meant. But this particular NPR interview is really, really good on it. And what Lee McIntyre says is in my book, I define post-truth as the political subordination of reality. So I think of post-truth as a tactic that's used by authoritarians and their wannabes to control the flow of information so that they control the populace. Is any of this sounding familiar to you all? Because it really, really should, shouldn't it? So on the left-hand side, we've got a picture from the American media in spring of 2020. And on the right-hand side is a large banner I took in a traffic jam in Sierra Leone during the Ebola. And people weren't believing Ebola was real. People weren't believing it was real, right, in Sierra Leone. In the US, people were saying it was politicized. There was no epidemic. This disease isn't going to get you. It's all being made up to drive behavior. I mean, come on, right? So what do you do in this situation? What I did was I ran the experiment. How did I run the experiment? Well, I was asked to comment on some privacy issues on Fox News, and I had a lot of suspicions. And I'm a empathetic, left-leaning person, and I'll put that out there. But at the same time, I try to be objective, and I said, let's figure this out. And so I met the person, good people trying to do good work, and they interviewed me. And this is what that interview ended up looking like on TV. Eric, how's the weather? The weather's really nice today. It's sunny, it's bright, everything's going good. And they're like, well, you live in New England, right? So what's the weather like in New England on the worst day? Well, on the worst day, we can have blizzards, we can have ice storms, things can be shut down. You'd be saving water in your bathtub like it's a hurricane. That could be the worst day. What did the interview look like on TV? Hey, Eric, what's the weather like? Well, it's the worst possible weather because it's blah, blah, blah. 100% without a doubt, I actually taped my own interview without them knowing it. And they scrambled answers and questions, and it wasn't cool. And I haven't gone on again because of that. But I think when you see that, you've got to recognize it. Now, people will tell me, well, but don't all medias do that? And I'll say, actually, my experience this year, no. I was on Here and Now twice this year on NPR. Both times, that not only was that not done, but in one of the interviews on COVID testing, I actually corrected the host because she said something had been FDA approved, and I said it had an emergency use authorization. They went back and retaped it to make sure that she said the correct thing. And I'm not going to say always good, always bad. What I'm going to say is the media is 100% being manipulative, and people have to be smart and be watching out for that. And at some point, we have to decide what's legal and what's not legal if people are being harmed and killed. So on social responsibility, Graham, you're right. I've got a lot of problems, but those problems belong to me. And you think they're yours, but you're not. Everybody that walks in that door becomes a part of your problem. Anybody that comes in contact with you, I didn't want to be part of your problem, but I am. So what if that problem was a virus, right? Let's be clear. We have to be thoughtful about this. If I'm a supermarket delivery driver, hourly rent, hourly wage, month-to-month rent, a baby at home, and I think I might have COVID. And if I tell my boss I'm getting fired, I might put on gloves, mask up, and not want to be tested too. And as irresponsible as that seems, I think we've got to understand that for people, food, clothing, shelter matters, right? At the same time, when people do have the ability to take care of themselves and to quarantine and stuff like that, we have to be able to do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of our research programs haven't been effective. It was about the wraparound services. People can only do what they can do. Take the belief out of it for a second. If I've got to be to work, I'm going to be at work, and I hope I don't get anybody else sick, but you know what? It is what it is. So social responsibility and morality, they're really different when something's going on. But attacking these things intentionally, that's something else. Telling people, vaccinated people telling unvaccinated people they shouldn't get the vaccine, that's something else. So a little bit about this, Rand Paul vows to introduce legislation to repeal mask mandates and stuff like that. You know what? This type of politicization, it's just hurting people. And you know what? I know it's politics. I know that stuff goes on, but for me, there's just been lines that have been crossed when it comes down to doing things and saying things that are going to get people hurt. If you're Norwegian Cruise Lines, you're going to lose millions and millions of dollars because you can't pull your ship into Florida, you're being penalized for trying to do the right thing, which is saying, look, the public sentiment now is a lot of people like me may never get on a cruise ship again. Doesn't matter if it's post-COVID or not. They just may never do it, right? And so these are industries that are trying to survive. At least they're trying to be responsible. And we shouldn't have a political system that's trying to punish them for that. We had this interesting thing a few weeks ago. You probably saw it. Biden said platforms like Facebook are killing people with COVID misinformation, and then Facebook isn't killing people. Biden softens his attack. My view on these platforms, frankly, is that they can be weaponized, and you can say it's whether it's their fault they can be weaponized or they can't be weaponized. But are arms dealers and bullets dealers responsible for wars? Not for starting them, right? They might make it easier, but I think things can be weaponized. I mean, a car can be weaponized by a drunk driver, right? I mean, these things can happen. And I think we do have to think about these social media platforms and the harm they can cause. And the fact that, by the way, they are cleaning up, right? Because they're taking ad money from everybody. They're taking it from both sides, which in an election is 100% fine. In a public health emergency, I think that's getting to be something else. So while I would probably agree that Facebook's like saying that platforms like Facebook are killing people might be a step over the line, it's just a toenail over the line as far as I'm concerned. On where to go from here. So John Mulaney, things are getting too complicated. And Cynthia, no, they're getting real simple. And I got to tell you at this point, I think things are getting real simple. I think that with what we've seen, 2 years ago, I stood in front of this audience in this forum and talked about the threat of misinformation. It was 600,000 lives of an epidemic earlier. We had no idea. We had no idea where we'd be right now. And so I'm going to say some of those same things, but I'm going to say them with a lot more force and a lot more intensity, because I think they're essential. I think, first of all, as I wrote in March of 2020, and then my colleagues at Harvard wrote again in April of 2021, one of the most important and most successful tools in all pandemics have been community health workers. I was recently on a panel with the African American COVID Task Force down at Duke in North Carolina, and one of the community leaders that was there was a community health worker. He was a barber, and I talked about how many people and how many conversations go through a barber shop in a day of people that have questions whether they should get vaccinated or not. Not only that, but what if Amazon drivers were community health workers? What if they had a community health worker in the truck with them when they went onto every street in this country every single day? What if they brought food? What if they could vaccinate? What if they could do COVID testing? We have to enable community health workers. And my closing thoughts here again about how we enable hackers as community health workers to save lives. So one of the best things in government is when they can do something bipartisan. It does happen. I know sometimes you don't think it does. And the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense is something I've studied, but I was reintroduced to recently by the amazing Nina Ali, the executive director of this forum. And so, here's a little bit of what's going on. I'm going to talk about some of their recommendations. If I didn't mention it, I know this will be on YouTube, but the actual deck, most of these graphics are hot linked, so you can go to the article and stuff like that. I couldn't hot link to the whole movie, though. You're going to have to go rent it or find that yourself. So the recommendations at a glance. So here's a whole list of them. Let's talk about two. Recommendation 6, improve the management of the biological intelligence enterprise. So this is better surveillance. Surveillance and monitoring online activity are things that hackers know how to do. They know how to measure reach, they know how to measure breadth, they know how to do these things. So this is a great application. Recommend, prioritize, and align investments in medical countermeasures among federal stakeholders. What about cyber countermeasures? Right? What about being able to take down destructive sites? What about ensuring that positive information and important sites stay up, that they're protected and they can't be hacked? So let's talk about recommendation 8 for cyber countermeasures. Recommendation 12 is to involve others beyond just the federal government. So what about We Heart Hackers, which already works with the FDA, already works with industry, already does something? Why do we not have We Heart Hackers Biodefense that works with federal entities on biosurveillance? Provide emergency service providers with the resources they need to keep themselves and their families safe. We've seen this, right? I talked about we needed a medical troll army in my last talk. What about simply keeping these people safe from being attacked? What about making sure their families are okay? What about making sure their internet stays up? What about making sure that their phones work, right? Can't we form a protective circle around people that are on the front lines? And can we be smarter? I mean, there's redouble efforts to share information with state, local, tribal parties. There's something called a certified social engineering prevention specialist. There are specialties now all across information science and communications and library science, and people that really know how to measure things, how to say things, how to determine impact. And shouldn't we have more people certified like this? Shouldn't there be a biodefense certification specialty for something like this? Develop and implement medical countermeasure response framework. The topic of my talk 2 years ago, a JAMA article that Rob Califf and I did about having cyber techniques as part of a countermeasure response framework. So link to that paper there. Definitely think we should do it. And then harden pathogen and advanced biotechnology information from cyber attacks. Well, this is exactly what the Biohacking Village and partners have done so well for the medical device industry, and why medical device makers bring their newest, highest potential devices to DEF CON, hoping to have them tested by the best security specialists, right? Isn't this a great expansion of the mission for Biohacking Village or something similar? Implement military civilian collaboration for biodefense. One of the things that I think is tough about government is that it kind of has always been somewhat siloed. And if you say the word defense, as in biodefense, it immediately means you're in the defense industry. You're talking to defense contractors. Well, what about biodefense and health? So I think the idea is, should we have a We Heart Hackers collaboration specifically for medicine with the DoD in a similar way that they have one with FDA? And of course, there are hacker collaborations with the DoD, but I'm talking specifically about biodefense. Prioritize innovation over incrementalism in medical countermeasure development. As somebody who's been a federal CIO, I can tell you that the procurement process in the federal government, it makes it very hard to implement, to innovate. It makes it hard to innovate and implement. And that you've got these large beltway bandits and these huge contracting rules. And, if I don't like that Google Cloud didn't get picked for this, I'm going to sue and all that type of stuff. I think they should come to DEF CON. I think they should work with individuals. I think they should work with cottage industries and small businesses. And I think that's where they'll find the innovation and the progress that they need. Recommend third, lead the way towards establishing a functional, agile, global public health response apparatus. We need one that's secure, we need one that's safe, and we need one that's trusted. Again, something that the experts in this room know something about. So, and bottom line, we really can no longer afford a public health system that's ultimately a silly movie about people behaving badly. We just didn't get it this time, and a lot of people died because of it, but we can learn from it, and we have to. So in closing, we need to apply We Heart Hackers to pandemic preparedness and biodefense, including public-private partnerships, formally and informally, hardening our defenses of biotechnology and pandemic information systems, collaborating with the medical and the scientific military. We must find a way to coordinate messaging and amplify messaging on the internet populace that aren't self-inflicted wounds like, we should have boosters, we don't need boosters. We have to stop that. We must improve surveillance and be willing to deploy cyber countermeasures when we know there's something wrong. With this thing with the Biden, Biden talking about misinformation, everybody kept talking about these 8 channels or these 11 channels. And all I got to say is, if you can prove it, why are they still up? And then lastly, we need the equivalent of certified social engineering prevention specialists and for equivalent for disinformation for making this work. Thanks for having me today. I enjoyed giving this talk. Hope you enjoyed hearing it. Now I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you very much. Peace.